Hey everybody, welcome. Great that we can be together here. I'm Jason Cusick. I'm the lead pastor here at Journey of Faith. I want to say hello to everybody that's connecting with us right now at our Torrance campus. We love you guys. Woo, Torrance! And I want to say hi to everybody that's checking us out online. You might be new with us for the first time, maybe even new with us for the first time here in person or watching us online. Thanks for making this part of your experience. We are in a series of messages called Your Best Self. And the idea behind this is all of us want to be the best versions of ourselves. How do we do it? Well, we're not at a lack for a lot of people telling us how to do it. So there's all kinds of voices out there telling us how to be the best version of ourselves. And so what we're doing in this series is we're looking at some of the teachings and experiences of Jesus. And we're saying, what does Jesus have to say to us about what it means to be our best selves? He knows us, he loves us, he made us. So how can moving closer to Jesus help us become the best version of ourselves? And we've been looking at different topics like purpose and success and healing our hurts. And today we're going to talk about this topic, simplicity. I was thinking about this topic, and I was remembering a trip I was just on. I was staying at a friend's house out of state, and I was on vacation. And one of the things that I love to do when I'm on vacation is just sleep in. I wake up pretty early on a regular basis, but it's like, man, I love to sleep in. And so one of the mornings I was there, I said, let me just sneak off to the bathroom, and then I'll come back to bed, and I can sleep some more. So I got up and went to the bathroom, and it was so bright, and I just covered my eyes because I needed to keep it dark. You ever get to this place where it's like, if the light hits you for a certain amount of time, you're like, well, I'm awake now, you know? So I was trying to convince my body that I was still kind of asleep, you know? So I had my eyes closed, and I'm like, boy, it's bright in here. Maybe I left the light on all night or something. So I went and flicked the switch. Well, it was already off. The lights were off. And I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. And then I remembered my friend had just bought this place and been remodeling it. And I thought, well, maybe it's a new light switch and it's, you know, a little temperamental. Maybe I have to move it a little bit. So I was like moving the switch around thinking that maybe there's a short in there or something like that. It was still super bright. And then I realized my friend doesn't just remodel stuff. He does it like really good. And I thought, I wonder if he put a dimmer or like a sensor on this thing. So I thought maybe when I walked in, it turned on. If I stand still, it'll just turn off. So I'm like standing still, waiting for it to turn on, and it didn't. And then by then, the light had crept in. I'm like, oh, forget it. I'm awake now. Jeez, you know? So I was like, let me wash my face. And wash my face. I toweled it off. I looked up, and I went, that's not a faulty switch or a motion sensor light. That's a skylight. That was actually just a hole in the ceiling, and the light that I was seeing was the sun. And I had made it very complicated by thinking it had a whole lot to do with that light. I was thinking about that story because I think as human beings, we tend to make life more complicated than it needs to be. In our schedules, we get busy because we think busy is better. And then we get so busy that we don't have time for what's really important. Or with our possessions, we think the key to life is having certain things. And we have advertisers saying, if you want to have a great life, you need to get this thing. And then we get all of this stuff, and then it's not helping us. I mean, our desire for a simple, best life isn't satisfied by our material possessions or by our busy schedules. Here's the good news. Jesus' words, Jesus' teachings are like a bright light from above that can say there's a better way. So here's what we're going to talk about today. Here's the main idea. We can thrive in simplicity through Jesus. When we look at Jesus' teachings, we actually see him talking about having a very simple faith. Not a simplistic faith, but a simple faith. In fact, in this series, we've been looking at teachings and experiences from the life of Jesus through one New Testament book. It's called Luke. It's written by a guy named Luke, and it records Jesus' life. And there's even a section in Luke that's kind of all about simplicity and how Jesus taught about simplicity. And we're going to look at two of these sections of teaching. This first one about having a simple focus in life, and the other one about a simple approach to possessions. And what I'm hoping through this experience is that we're going to look at this and we're going to see maybe some of our ideas of simplicity maybe changing. Maybe some of our myths will be corrected. But we're also going to get some really insights about what it means to live our best life in a simple way. Let's look at the first story today. It's from Jesus' life where he's invited by a couple of friends to a dinner party that they're hosting. And here's what it says. As Jesus and the disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Her sister, Mary, sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he taught. But Martha was distracted by the big dinner that she was preparing. She came to Jesus and said, "Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come help me." But the Lord said to her, "My dear Martha, you're worried and upset over all these details." Let's go to the next one. There's only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her. Now, if you're new to faith or new to the Bible, this is actually a very popular story in the life of Jesus, the story of these two women, Martha and Mary. Martha has a big heart for hospitality. And in Jesus' day, this was really, really important. Hospitality was a big virtue. If somebody's coming over to your house and they're a big deal, you make a big deal out of them. I mean, you pull out all the stops. Some of you grew up in cultures that really emphasize hospitality. So she's all about hospitality. Mary is all about learning from Jesus. She's sitting at his feet. Now, that would have been literally sitting at the feet of a learned rabbi. And by the way, that was also kind of inappropriate and unusual for women to be doing in that day, but Jesus was a big advocate in empowering women to learn and grow and follow him. When this story is often told and taught, it's often mistold as a wrestling match between hospitality and learning from Jesus. But that's not the tension in this story. The point of this story we find buried right in the middle of it in verse 40, and here's what it says. Martha was distracted. Martha was so focused on the details of preparing dinner that she forgot who the dinner was for. In fact, Jesus kind of very tenderly says to her, "My dear Martha, you're worried and upset over all these details. There's only one thing worth being concerned about." Notice that Jesus doesn't say, "Martha, stop preparing food. Stop making the dinner and just sit down and listen to my teaching." Because that's not really the point. See, I know people who are really good at hospitality. Some of you are like this. You can host a huge party for an enormous amount of people, and you can be totally connected with people and engaged in relationships, and you're really in touch with the big picture of what's going on. And I know other people who are sitting quietly, focused on one person talk, and they're totally distracted. Some of you are like that right now. I'm talking, and you're in your mind, you're like, "Oh, what I got to do that thing later?" And, "Oh, I wonder if I did that. Oh, let me go flip through and look at some other stuff while he's talking." You know, like so it's not about one or the other. The bigger issue is there's a choice to be had right here. And that's what Jesus is emphasizing, the choice. Here's one way we can thrive in simplicity with Jesus. Choose to be focused rather than busy. Choose to be focused rather than busy. Let's just admit, we are a busy people. In LA, especially in the South Bay. So I got back from visiting my friend's house, and you know when you land into LAX, it's just kind of gross. Because there's a lot of gross things about LAX, but when you land in LAX, it's like everybody's so busy. We're all hustling to get somewhere. Like I was on the freeway the other day and people just zip by me. I'm like, what's the hurry? You know? Like we're all so busy. And for as much as we have like a relaxed South Bay vibe to us, we're busy. And we make our kids busy. And part of that is because we might have some core beliefs about busyness. I kind of mentioned in the beginning. Like some of us feel like having busy schedules is better, but we're so busy that we're not getting the important things done. Some of us, we have really busy schedules, but our priorities are off. Some of us in the South Bay, we feel like more information is better. So more books, more podcasts, more social media. So as a result, we're more educated, but we're not more wise. Some of us feel like it's better to work more because if I work more, that means I'm more responsible. But some of us are actually less responsible with our boundaries, with our family time, and even with our own health. And that's not sustainable. And then us church folks and Jesus people, we're not off the hook because what we do is we do the same thing. We say, well, like spiritually, more is better. We should have more church services. What's better than one Bible study that you go to? 2 Bible studies that you go to, right? And we want our sermons longer. We want more information. And what we've done is we've connected spiritual depth with complexity or data or amount, and we don't realize that spiritual depth and growth really comes from finding ways to simply apply the simple yet not easy teachings of Jesus. So what we've done is we've taken all of this busy complexity culture and we've slapped a Jesus label on it and we call it spiritual growth. What Jesus is trying to do with Martha is not get her to stop being hospitable. He's not even actually telling her to do less. What he's telling her to do is to focus on what she's doing. What is the purpose of the party, Martha? What's the purpose of your job, your school, your parenting, your calendar, your checkbook? What's the bigger purpose? Let me do you a little show and tell here. For those of you that know me, you know that I like going to estate sales. I'm at estate sales every weekend. I love going through stuff that people are getting rid of. And so I've seen some of you there. Sometimes we recognize and acknowledge each other. Sometimes we kind of turn the other way and don't recognize each other as we're thumbing through other people's possessions. But I like picking up interesting and unusual things I've never seen before. So I found this thing. I want to share it with you. I got a picture of it right here, and I have the actual thing right here. So this is a World War II sight scope from a tank. And it's legit. It's got the face mask on it, and you look through there, and it's a little telescope. And I can see the Torrance campus right now. Hi, guys at Torrance. This complex piece of military equipment has one function: to limit distraction so that a soldier can focus. I think that's what Jesus wants to do with us. We live in a busy culture, where we are very distracted, and we are distracted easily. It's easy for us to get focused on the wrong things, and that's what Jesus is trying to do with Martha. He even says to her right here, he says, there's only one thing worth being concerned about, and in the story he says, Mary has chosen, or Mary has discovered it, or Mary has chosen. In the literal language that this was written in, it says, Mary has chosen the better portion, which we think is kind of a word play because Martha is preparing portions of food, and she's focused on the portions of food, and Jesus says Mary chose the better portion, and that portion was the spiritual focus. Here's the point I think he's making on what we need to focus on. Some of us are too focused on our boss. I don't like my boss. I don't think my boss is doing things the right way. Whereas Jesus wants us focused on the work that God has called us to do and the relationships he's calling us to. See, the New Testament says, work for your boss as unto the Lord. Work not because you're serving people, but because you're serving God. What if we leaned into my job is really a way that I get to serve God and others are blessed? Some of us are way too focused on our grades at school. Now, parents, don't get upset with me right now because you were like, well, don't you talk about my kids need good grades or they're not going to get through high school and then they won't get into that college and then they won't have a successful career. Listen, spiritual people have bought into this idea that somehow our future success is absolutely determined by grades that we get through standardized testings in our American school systems. That is not where success comes from. What we need to help our young people focus on, and young people, I'm going to speak to you. If your parents want to get upset with me and come talk to me, that's fine. What we need to be focused on is, am I learning? Am I growing? Am I becoming a more educated and wise person? That's what he wants us focused on. Some of us are overly focused on people's opinions of us, other people's emotions, how we look. We've got all this stuff coming at us. What Jesus is saying, make sure you're not distracted by all these other things. I want you to be focused. Focused on me. That's a simple faith. Now, what that means sometimes, though, is we might have to do less in order to get that focus going. So here's a challenge I have for you. Slim down your schedule to make room for real value. Some of us are just too busy. We have too much going on. Like I said, it's part of the culture around here to be busy. To simplify is really hard. So what I did is I made a list of some of the top priorities in my life. Time with God, time with my family and friends, some of my big work projects, rest, and my artwork. And I find if I prioritize these things, then I have a little bit less room for people's drama or getting entangled in a bunch of crazy conversations that I don't need to be in. Or I have less time of just scrolling on social media looking at stuff. By the way, at 9 a.m. this morning, some of you got your screen time update. That's when it gets sent out, Sunday morning at 9 a.m. So a good reminder to kind of do a check of yourself, like how much screen time am I actually on? If you don't prioritize the things that are important, all those other things end up going to the top of the list. But Jesus is inviting us to have a simple focus that puts our spiritual life at the top of the schedule. And if our spiritual life is at the top of the schedule, then the other stuff fits in really, really good. And we find some of the other things are part of the spiritual life. Work and school and relationships. These are all part of the spiritual life if we have the right focus. We can thrive with Jesus in simplicity. And one of them is we have to choose to be focused rather than busy. like Jesus' advice to Martha. Now we have another way, and that has to do with this, what Jesus talked about possessions. So we're going to talk about that. When Jesus talked about possessions, he often told stories. And here's a story that Jesus told that he can say to us today. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. He said to himself, "What should I do? I don't have room for all my crops." Then he said, "I know, I'll tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones. Then I'll have room enough to store all my wheat and other goods. And I'll sit back and I'll say to myself, my friend," I love how he calls himself his own friend. He's like, I'm going to say to myself, "Friend, you have enough stored away for years to come. Now, take it easy. Eat, drink, and be merry." Now, Jesus turns the story. He says, "But God said to him, 'You fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked for?'" Then he concludes, "Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God." When I read this story about the guy tearing down his barns and building bigger barns to keep all his stuff, I immediately was like, I wonder how big the self-storage industry is in the world today. So I went online and I started looking around. The self-storage industry in the world today is a $39.5 billion industry. We have a lot of stuff. And we want more stuff. We crave stuff. In fact, human beings crave stuff so much that God couldn't even get through writing the 10 Commandments without addressing it in there. Look at one of the commandments. You must not covet, the word is crave. You should not covet your neighbor's house or their wife, male or female servants, oxes, donkeys, anything else that belongs to your neighbor. Don't crave any of the stuff that's out there, especially if it belongs to somebody else. My niece was memorizing this as part of her bat mitzvah for Judaism, and she said to her rabbi, can I just say, don't crave your neighbor's stuff? Can I just summarize it like that?" And he was like, "No, you got to memorize the whole thing." I was like, "I think it's pretty good stuff. It includes everything." We crave stuff. Now, what's interesting is Jesus does not condemn people for being rich. And Jesus doesn't actually speak against having a lot of stuff. Like the story of Martha and Mary, the issue is not how many things you have to do or how much stuff you have, it's your focus. The only time that Jesus criticizes people for how much stuff they have is if it gets in the way of a relationship with God, because that's how he ends the story. He says, yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. See what he's doing? He's redefining rich. See, it's possible to have a lot of wealth, but if you aren't connected to your larger spiritual purpose in life, then you're not rich. And let me just point out a word here that Jesus uses that we would do well to understand about. This word fool. When biblical literature or when Jesus or when Bible writers use the word fool, they're not referring to somebody that's unintelligent or uncreative or unsophisticated or unknowledgeable. When biblical authors refer to a person as a fool, what they mean is someone that does not see the spiritual dimension outside of the material dimension. It's the person who just sees their job, but doesn't see it as a way that they could fulfill the Creator's life purpose for them. It's someone who just sees parenting as raising a kid versus God entrusting our children to us and allowing us to shape their understanding of the world and God. It's when we look at school and we just focus on grades and graduating and tests, and we're not saying, wait a minute, There's an opportunity for me to learn and grow and excel and be challenged in my own understanding of things for a greater spiritual purpose. So I guess if that's the case, we're all fools in one way or another, because we all have areas of our lives that we're too focused on the thing and not focused on what God is doing in it. And in this story in particular, Jesus is trying to give us a picture of a man who's more interested in holding on to things rather than understanding his bigger spiritual purpose. And that's the second way that we can really thrive in simplicity through Jesus, and it's this, that we choose giving rather than holding. See, God is a generous God. So when we start getting a bigger picture of the world and a better spiritual picture of what it means to live with God, it should lead us to have less of a grip on things. This last summer, my wife and I did our second annual yard sale. So I took a picture of it here. We went through our whole house, our whole garage, got a bunch of stuff. We took it off the screen because I didn't want you to see all my stuff. But we went through all of it. You have that? So we went through all of our stuff, and we said, if we haven't touched it in a year, we're going to get rid of it. Now, I don't like having a lot of stuff. But don't confuse simplicity with minimalism. Minimalism is an aesthetics choice. You can have a lot of stuff and have a simple spiritual focus in life. You can also say, I'm not going to have a lot of stuff, and it can make your life very, very complicated. Again, it's not about the amount of stuff. It's about where is your focus. And that's why this has been really important for us as a family, because when we go through all of our stuff, it's not just about having less stuff. We go through the stuff, and then at our yard sale, we don't sell anything. We just give it away. And there's a reason that we're doing that too. We use it as an opportunity with our neighbors to talk about spiritual things. Because they walk up, they go, oh, how much for this thing? And it was like, it's free. What do you mean it's free? God's blessed us, so we're blessing you. We said, look, all the things any of us get are really free from God. We do transactions with money, but God's best things in our life are free. And it gives us an opportunity to talk about spiritual things. Now, I don't want to guilt you or shame you into having yard sales where you actually make money. And this isn't a problem with making money. Again, where's our focus? What are we trying to do? Because that's the other part, too, about generosity and about growing and giving, is it begins shaping us as people. The reason God wants us to let go of our grip on things is so that we can become more like Him. He's generous with us. So here's a challenge I have for you. Give away one treasured possession. Now, that might be tough. Some of you might be like, we should also be giving away like our need to be in control, or our need to be right, or our need to get the last word in, our need to win an argument. Yes, absolutely we should be doing that kind of stuff. But there is something powerful. We're talking about material possessions right now, about letting go of our stuff. Now, when I say get rid of a treasured possession, there's stuff we want. I have keepsakes. I have stuff that I want to hang on to. But there are things that we're holding on to more tightly than we should. Maybe they represent successes in our past. Maybe they represent who we were at some point. Maybe they represent who we want to be. For some of us, we're holding on to things, but in reality, those things are holding on to us. What do you need to let go of? And it's not just getting rid of, okay, I got rid of the thing. What it does is it begins training us to be more flexible with our generosity. I'll give you a little picture of that. So a few years back, I was meeting with this fitness guy, and he was helping me get in shape. And I said, what are some simple things they can do? that I could do to get in shape. And he was like, well, every morning touch your toes. And I was like, okay, I could do that. And it's not a problem, And he was like, no, you got to like stretch and touch your toes. I was like, all right. So I started doing it, and the first morning I was like, and my toes were so far away. And I called him up. I was like, my body doesn't do that. Like I'm just not built. I had all these, my back is, I'm not. And he said, look, the goal is little by little, you're stretching, right? If it isn't there, over time, you will get there and you'll be able to touch your toes, right? By the way, last service, everybody applauded at that. And I was so, no, I'm not saying that. I was so embarrassed. I was like, that's a low bar for success that I can touch my toes. But I collected the applause. I was like, I'll use that later when I feel horrible about myself. But it's that stretch. You can feel it. When you're doing the test, you can feel the stretching going on. That's what happens when you give away stuff. You're like, oh, that stretches. That's kind of uncomfortable. By the way, generosity, a good gauge for generosity is discomfort. If you're comfortable with how much you give, you should probably give more. It's like a workout. That's how you grow in generosity. And it's one of those things that you can say, well, I'm just not built like that. Well, no, the way you become built like that is by doing it. God is wanting us to thrive, and we don't thrive in complexity. We don't thrive by being busier or having more stuff. Jesus says, here's how we thrive. Choose to be focused rather than busy. And here's the second one. Choose giving rather than holding. And these are choices. No one drifts into complexity. No one drifts into simplicity. That's what I mean. Nobody drifts into simplicity. You drift into complexity. In order to be simple, you have to choose that. Now, let me close with just one thing real quick, and that is, I think one of the reasons that we tend to be overly busy and have more stuff than we need is because there's a restlessness going on inside of us, a spiritual restlessness. I'm anxious. I'm not feeling good. I don't feel like I'm living up to God's standards, or I don't feel like I'm successful. So what we do is we get busier, or we start buying stuff, or we start eating stuff, or we start collecting more information because we're trying to deal with this spiritual restlessness that's inside us. And what God wants to do, he says, let me deal with the spiritual restlessness. So here's a verse that I read this week that really stood out to me. You, meaning God, you will keep in perfect peace all who trust in you, all whose thoughts are fixed on you. That's what we're talking about, being fixed on Jesus. A simple faith in Jesus. That doesn't mean we have to be busier. It means we need to be more focused. A simple faith in Jesus doesn't mean you need more stuff. Maybe it means you need to be more generous. And I think if we take those steps, we'll be closer to being our best selves. So let me close this in prayer, and we're going to ask God to help us this week with this. And then next week and the week after, we're going to be talking a little bit more about what to do with that discomfort in life. What to do with how we're thinking and what we're feeling, and what do we do when we're in a spot where, hey, this is a difficult season in my life. What do I do next? We're going to talk about what some of those answers are. So would you stand with me? At Torrance, would you stand up, Manhattan Beach here? Thank you so much. This is your first time with us. Thanks so much. Looking forward to being with you next time, and would love to get you connected here more if we can find a way to do that. Let me pray for us. Gracious God, thank you so much for your love in our life. Thank you for how you take care of us and how you lead us and guide us in the right way. This week, help us to stretch. Help us to be more focused on you. Help us to eliminate the distractions. And help us to be rich in a relationship with you, Jesus. We thank you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. God bless you, everybody. Thanks for coming.